"Your curvy body drives me wild," the mountain man declared to the girl they called Too Fat to Marry. Snow falls heavy on a lonely mountain trail. A rugged hunter rides through the storm until he finds a wagon half buried in snow and a woman left inside to die. Her family abandoned her, calling her a burden. But when he lifts her into his arms, something awakens in both their hearts that neither expected. By the fire's glow, he tells her words she's never heard before, words that change everything. But when they ride into town, laughter follows them. Gossip spreads like wildfire, and a greedy land agent sees his chance to take everything she owns. Now love and honor are on trial in a world that mocks mercy. One woman's courage, one man's faith, against the cold cruelty of pride and greed. Will they survive the winter and prove that true worth isn't measured by looks, but by the fire God places in the soul? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The wind cut across the ridge like a saw blade, biting at the skin and driving snow sideways through the trees. Hiram Sloane hunched lower in his saddle, his fur collar crusted white with frost. His mule snorted and tossed its head, weary from the climb. The sky had gone pewter gray by mid-afternoon, and he reckoned another hour would see the trail gone completely under snow. He had meant to be home before nightfall. His traps were set, and there was meat enough hanging in his smoke shed to last a week. But hunger and habit had driven him to check one last line down the draw. That was when he saw it, a dark lump ahead, half buried against a drift, with one wheel sticking out like a broken bone. Hiram reined in, the mule's ears flicked forward. It was a covered wagon, one of the small, family-made kind, not freight. Snow piled thick on its canvas top, and the traces were cut clean. No horses, no smoke, no sound. He dismounted slowly, his bad leg stiff as iron. The air was still but heavy, the kind that warned of more snow to come. He brushed at the wagon's flap and peered inside. At first he thought it empty. Then a faint sound, more breath than voice, made him freeze. A woman lay huddled beneath a quilt at the back, her hair matted, her face pale as wax. One hand clutched a torn scrap of paper. "Ma'am," he said, rough from disuse. No answer. He climbed in, careful not to shake the wagon. Her pulse was faint, but there. The note under her fingers read, "Left behind. No choice. Too heavy to haul." Hiram's jaw tightened. He looked at her again. Round face, frost on her lashes, lips cracked blue. He wrapped her in his coat and carried her out into the storm. The mule balked, but Hiram spoke low. "Easy, girl. We're taking her home." The snow deepened fast, knee-high, then thigh-deep. Each step jarred his bad leg, but he kept moving. The cabin sat 3 miles north by the ridge. In weather like this, it felt like 30. Twice he stumbled. Once he almost fell. But by dusk, he saw smoke curling from his own chimney. Inside, the place was warm from the morning fire he'd banked. He laid the woman on his bunk, peeled off her frozen boots, and rubbed her hands until color returned. Then he poured a tin cup of hot broth and coaxed it past her lips. Hours passed. She didn't wake. He changed her blanket when it soaked through with melted snow. Outside, the wind screamed like a thing alive. Hiram sat in his chair, watching her breathe, the lantern light soft on her face. He hadn't seen another soul in months. Now one lay half dead in his bed. When morning came, the storm had buried the trail. The woman's fever burned high. She tossed and murmured, her voice breaking into little gasps. "Too fat, too slow, always in the way." Hiram frowned. He dipped a cloth in cool water and laid it on her brow. "Hush now. Ain't no one here but me." She didn't hear him. Her hand reached toward the ceiling, trembling. "Lord, if you're merciful, don't let me wake again." That hit him deep. He hadn't prayed in years, not proper. But something about the broken sound of it made him bow his head. "Don't you listen to that," he muttered. "You let her stay." The next night, she opened her eyes. They were hazel, soft, confused, rimmed with fever. "Where am I?" "My cabin," he said, setting down his whittling knife. "Name's Hiram Sloane. Found you near dead in that wagon yonder." She blinked at the ceiling a long time before answering. "You should have left me." He shook his head. "Wasn't about to leave any soul to freeze. Hungry?" She nodded faintly. He fed her spoon by spoon until she couldn't keep her eyes open. Days passed in slow rhythm. The wind, the fire, the sound of snow sliding from the roof. Her strength returned bit by bit. She learned his name again. He learned hers. Madison Cobb. He asked little, and she offered less. But one night, as they sat by the fire, she spoke. "My pa was a rancher south of Gunnison. After he passed, my stepfather sold the cattle and said I was too much to feed. Said a woman built like me had no chance of marrying. He meant to send me east with kin, but..." Her throat tightened. "Guess he changed his mind halfway." Hiram stared into the fire. "You're alive. That's what matters." She laughed once, bitter and quiet. "Alive ain't the same as wanted." He looked at her then. Really looked. The firelight painted her round face gold, her eyes wet but steady. He saw not weakness but the raw edge of someone still fighting to believe she had a place in the world. "Madison," he said softly, "you listen here. Your curvy body drives me wild, because it means you're alive, means you fought through that storm instead of laying down to die." Her mouth fell open. For a second, she thought he mocked her, but his eyes were steady, his tone plain as truth. She turned away, tears rising fast. No man had ever spoken of her body without cruelty. "Why'd you say that?" she whispered. "Because it's true." Neither spoke after that. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind eased, and for the first time in days, quiet settled like peace. That night, Hiram dreamed of light instead of war. When dawn came, Madison was already up, stirring the fire and mending one of his torn shirts. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I can't sit idle, it feels wrong." He smiled faintly. "Then we'll call it even. You mend, I cook." They shared breakfast, flapjacks and jerky stew. She thanked him, voice steady now. For the first time, she smiled. It changed her whole face. By afternoon, the storm broke. Blue sky opened wide above the pines, and meltwater dripped from the roof. Hiram hitched his mule and checked the traps along the creek. Madison swept the cabin, humming a hymn under her breath. That evening, when he returned, she met him at the door with a bowl of hot stew. "I figured you'd be cold," she said. He accepted it, surprised. "Much obliged." They ate side by side in silence, easy and comfortable. She asked about the mountains, what grew there, what dangers waited in spring. He told her of elk herds and thaw floods, and the nights when coyotes sang close enough to chill the bone. After supper, she stood at the window, watching dusk fall. "You live here alone all the time?" "Mostly," he said. "Don't reckon I'm much company." "You've been more company than I've known in years." He didn't answer, but his chest warmed at the words. Before bed, she folded her blanket neatly at the foot of the bunk. "Tomorrow, if weather holds, you could take me to town. I'll find work or something." Hiram hesitated. "You sure you're strong enough?" She nodded. "I won't be your burden." He wanted to tell her she wasn't. but pride held him silent. That night, the moon rose clear over the ridge. Hiram lay awake long after the fire died, listening to her even breathing. He thought of the note she'd clutched, too heavy to haul. He'd burned it that first night. The words didn't deserve to live. When morning came, he found her at the creek, washing dishes in the cold water. Her cheeks were pink from the chill, her eyes bright. "I can travel," she said, reading his look. "If we leave now, we'll reach Silver Creek by sundown." He studied her a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll go." They packed simple: jerky, cornmeal, coffee. Hiram loaded the mule, helped her mount side saddle, and started down the narrow trail. The world below glistened fresh under new snow. As they rode, a hawk circled high overhead, its cry echoing off the cliffs. For the first time in years, Hiram felt something like peace. By afternoon, smoke from town chimneys rose in the valley. Madison's breath caught when she saw it. "It's been so long since I saw a steeple." "Silver Creek's small," Hiram said, "but it's honest, mostly." When they reached the first buildings, a blacksmith, a saloon, and a small church, the townsfolk paused to stare. A mountain man bringing in a woman was talk enough for a week. Hiram helped her down, steadying her hand. The gesture, meant kindly, drew whispers from the porch. Inside the general store, the air was warm and thick with spice. Madison stepped toward the counter, trying to ignore the stares. The storekeeper's wife smiled thinly. "Can I help you?" "I need fabric and some tea leaves, if you've any," Madison said softly. The woman's eyes flicked to Hiram, then back. "Of course." Her tone carried more curiosity than kindness. While Madison looked over bolts of cloth, a pair of ranch hands at the stove began to chuckle. "Ain't she the one Sloan hauled in from the pass?" one whispered. "Heard she near broke his mule." The laughter rose. Hiram turned, slow and dangerous. "You boys say that again, and you'll pick your teeth out of the sawdust." Silence fell. Madison's face burned red. She set the fabric down and walked out without a word. Outside, she stood by the hitch rail, eyes shining with hurt. Hiram followed, jaw tight. "Don't pay them no mind," he said. "It's fine," she murmured. "I'm used to it." He felt something in him break. He turned toward the crowd that had gathered. Storekeeper, hands, a woman or two, and said loud enough for all to hear. "She's no shame to stand beside. She's the only woman I've met worth the breath to speak her name. I love her." Gasps rippled through the street. A church bell rang somewhere beyond. Madison's eyes went wide. "Why would you say that?" she whispered. "Because it's true," he said, voice low. The wind carried his words through the still air, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Somewhere in the back of the crowd, a man in a fine coat watched with narrow eyes. He turned toward the office marked Land and Tax Records and smiled thinly. The mountain man's declaration had stirred more than gossip. It had awakened greed. And so began the trouble that would test them both. The church bell finished its long note and left the town street quiet. Hiram stood there with his words still hanging in the cold air. He had said them plain and out loud. "I love her." The sound seemed to echo off the false fronts and the frosted windows until it faded into the steady whisper of the wind. Madison did not move at first. Her cheeks were red from shame and from the hard ride down the mountain. Her eyes shone like lamplight on dark water. She held her hands together to stop their tremble. The folks on the boardwalk pretended to go back to their business. They did not. They watched the pair in the street as people always watch when they smell a story that is not theirs. A door opened down by the church. The circuit preacher stepped out and pulled his collar close against the cold. He was not a big man, but he walked like someone used to standing between trouble and folks who needed a hand. He came straight up the boardwalk, boots thumping slow and sure. Afternoon had slipped toward evening. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the last light turned the snow into a soft blue blanket. A team clattered by, the driver clicking to his horses and giving the couple a long look that held no malice, only curiosity. A dog nosed along the ruts, sniffed Hiram's boot, and trotted away. "Evening," the preacher said. His voice carried the quiet of a man who had sat with the dying and seen mornings come again. "Name's Elijah Green. I reckon this town could stand to learn what a proper welcome sounds like." He tipped his hat to Madison. "Ma'am, you look in need of warmth and tea. My wife keeps both." Madison tried to speak and could not. She nodded instead. Hiram kept his eyes on the men by the stove inside the mercantile. Their laughter had died, but the harm was done. He did not regret what he had said. He only wished he had said it sooner. "Much obliged, Reverend," he answered. "We came for supplies. We will not trouble your house." "You would be no trouble," Reverend Green said. "Kindness is not trouble. It is the work the Lord put in our hands." Before Hiram could answer, a gentleman in a fine brown coat stepped from the office near the telegraph. He wore neat gloves and a pin at his collar. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "Fine words," he said. "And a fine story for a winter afternoon. Allow me to offer mine. Ephraim Burke. I hold the land and tax ledgers for this district." He looked at Madison in a way that measured and weighed. "You are the Cobb girl, are you not?" Madison's jaw tightened. "My name is Madison Cobb." Burke's smile grew a shade warmer, like a lamp turned up one notch. "Of course. And Mr. Sloane, I have heard of you as well. You keep to the high country. Useful men do that. We must talk tomorrow, when there is daylight and a fire under the coffee pot. I believe there are matters touching the Cobb parcel that require attention." "What parcel?" Hiram said. "The late Jacob Cobb's homestead, 7 miles south by Creek and Cottonwood," Burke said. "Taxes lapsed last year on that claim. The paperwork is tangled. I am a friend to order. I can spare both of you no end of grief." He tipped his hat to Madison again. "Please, do warm yourself this evening. Silver Creek is not as cold as it looks. Not when one knows the right doors." He turned and walked away, boots neat in the snow, coat swinging easy. The telegraph clicked as he passed, tapping like a beetle in a wall. He went inside his office and shut the door. Hiram felt the hair rise at the back of his neck. He had seen men like that before. They wore clean shirts and kept their hands soft. They drew blood with paper cuts and made it look like the fault of the wounded. Reverend Green saw the same thing and let out a breath. "Supper is on at our place," he said. "Come sit a spell. Then you can ride when the moon is up, or stay in our small room if the lady is weary." They followed him up the boardwalk. The preacher's house sat beside the church, a simple place of plank and stone with yellow windows that looked warm enough to step into. When the door opened, heat and the smell of stew spilled out like a blessing. A woman with gray at her temple set down a wooden spoon and wiped her hands on her apron. "Welcome," she said. "I am Clara Green. You look half froze, both of you. Boots off, if you please. Sit close to the stove." Madison's legs shook from the ride and from the moment in the street. She sank into a chair and pressed her hands toward the stove's glow. Clara poured tea into a tin cup and set it in those hands without fuss, the way a mother does when she knows a thing before you ask it. "There now," she said. "Drink slow." Hiram remained standing until the preacher nodded at a second chair. "Sit, Mr. Sloane," he said. A man cannot fight wind and weather and pride all on one set of legs. I am obliged, Hiram said and sat. The chair creaked under his weight. He took the bowl of stew that followed and the bread that came after, and he ate slow like a man at ease, even though he was not. They spoke little as steam rose from bowls. The food worked warmth through them. The preacher told a small story about a calf born in a snowbank last spring that lived because a boy would not leave it. The story had no lesson attached, yet it carried one anyway. Madison listened with a faraway look, and then gave a small laugh. The sound lightened the room. When the bowls had been cleared, Clara brought a quilt and put it around Madison's shoulders. "You are safe here," she said. "Silver Creek can be coarse. It can also be kind. Tomorrow is a new day." Hiram finished his tea and set the cup down. "We are much obliged," he said. "We have a ride back to the ridge. We had best make it while the moon gives light." Clara looked at the frost on the panes. "There will be more weather before dawn." She turned her soft gaze to Madison. "You are pale yet." Madison felt the pull in her bones. She wanted the small bed in the corner and the warm quilt. She wanted to trust the kindness she saw in these people. But she looked to Hiram and saw the worry in his face. He did not like to sleep under another roof when trouble had just learned their names. "I can ride," she said. They thanked the Greens again. Clara tucked 2 biscuits and a small wrapped wedge of cheese into Madison's pocket, like a secret she wanted them to find later. Reverend Green walked them to the porch. He looked up at the pale moon and then at Hiram. "If that man comes calling," he said, "do not meet him with iron. Meet him with paper and witness. Bring me word." "I will," Hiram said. He meant it. They rode out of town at a slow walk. The street behind them closed over with silence and new snow. The cold bit sharp. The mule's ears pricked forward, and its breath showed white in the moonlight. Pines stood like a line of sentries along the ridge. Each hoofbeat rang clear on frozen ground. For a while they said nothing. The night wrapped them in its own hush, and the creek whispered under ice. At the low ford, the mule stumbled once, and Hiram reached to steady Madison without thinking, his hand warm on her arm. She did not pull away. "You should not have said it in the street," she said at last, voice small under the sky. "It was time," he answered. Her breath came out in a cloud. "I have never been anything but shame to the folks who spoke of me. You made me feel like not shame." She paused, then added, "I do not know what to do with that." "Keep it," he said. "It is yours." They reached the cabin well past moonrise. The door stuck with cold, then swung wide. Hiram shook snow from his hat and got a fire going fast, stacking kindling with the sure motions of long habit. The cabin warmed, the shadows backed off, and the smell of wood smoke filled the room. Madison's hand stung as heat found them. She unwrapped the small bundle Clara had tucked in her pocket and smiled. "She gave us biscuits," she said. "Wise woman," Hiram said. He set the pot to heat and poured coffee. They shared the biscuits and cheese at the small table. When they had eaten, he took his bedroll to the floor by the hearth. She looked at the bunk, then at him. "Your leg will ache on the floor," she said. "Take the bed." "It aches where it pleases," he said. "You take the bed." She started to argue, and then stopped. She was learning the places where plain words did more than long talk. She laid herself down and turned her face toward the fire. He lay on the floor with one arm under his head, watching the flames move. "Do you think he will come?" she asked. "He said he would," Hiram answered. She was quiet a long time. "My pa had a deed. He kept papers under a false bottom in Ma's trunk. He showed me once when I was little. Said a woman must know where her ground stands." "You know where that trunk is," Hiram said. She nodded into the pillow. "At my stepfather's house, if he did not sell it. He would not look for a false bottom. He had no patience for such things." Hiram turned his face to the rafters and listened to the small ticks and groans of the warming cabin. "We will fetch it," he said. "Not at night, not in a storm. We will fetch it when the road gives leave." She did not answer, and after a time he knew she slept. He woke before dawn. The cold had crept into the room again, and the fire was coals. He fed it and stepped outside. The world was blue and white and quiet as a held breath. His mule stood with frost along its withers, head low, steam rising. Off to the west, a thin line of cloud hinted at more weather. He brought in wood, cracked ice from the water bucket, and set coffee to boil. When Madison stirred, the light had turned from steel to pearl. They ate flapjacks with molasses and drank hot coffee. She moved around the room steady now, not fine, but steady. She had tied her hair back in a simple ribbon Clara had pressed on her without words. It made her look younger and stronger both. A shadow crossed the threshold. Hiram looked up. A knock followed. 2 taps, then 1. The door stood open already. A man filled it with his neat coat and his neat smile. 2 riders waited behind him on the trail, mounted and holding their horses like men who worked for pay that did not come from cows. "Forgive the early hour," Ephraim Burke said. "Morning rides suit me, Mr. Sloan. They give a man a fine appetite for clear answers." He stepped in without waiting and took off his gloves, finger by finger. He held a paper packet in his hand. "I have brought you both the kindness of knowledge." Madison stood at the end of the table, chin lifted. "What knowledge?" she said. Burke set the packet on the table and untied the string. Inside lay papers with fine print and tidy lines, each line a place where a man could hide a snake. He spread the top sheet and tapped it with one gloved finger. "Taxes due on the Cobb parcel for the year past," he said. "Interest and penalty for non-payment. Warrant for seizure if not satisfied in 30 days. You are fortunate. I have a buyer who will take on the burden of this land and see you properly settled. You can avoid all unpleasantness with one simple signature on this quitclaim." He turned the sheet so Madison could read. The room had gone very quiet. Hiram could hear the tick of melting snow dripping from the eaves. Madison did not sit. She read every word, her mouth firm. "My father paid what he owed," she said. "He kept his accounts clean as his tack. He took pride in that." Burke's smile did not move. "Men take pride in many things. The ledger does not share their feelings." He slid the paper toward her a half-inch, like a card sharp making a friendly move. "There is no need for anger. The railroad brings progress. The town grows. You will be free to start fresh. The past is heavy to haul. Why carry it?" Hiram remembered the note from the wagon and felt heat rise in him that had nothing to do with the fire. He set his hands flat on the table. "You will mind your words," he said. "The lady is not freight." Burke looked at him as if measuring a broken fence post to see if it held. "I have no wish to offend. I serve the law as given to me. The law says this land is sinking in debt. The law offers a clean path. I am the helpful man pointing the way." "Your path goes through our home," Hiram said. "Your home stands on borrowed time," Burke said. He glanced at Madison. "Ma'am, do not think the courts will be kind. They are slow. Paper eats money while it waits. I can spare you that. Sign, and you will have coin enough to set up in town. You could sow, perhaps. People will speak to you kindly when your pockets jingle." The words struck clean as a slap. Hiram took a step forward. Madison put out her hand without looking at him. He stopped. The gesture was small and full of trust. She looked at the papers again. She read the name under the buyer's line. It was not a name she knew, which made her trust it no more. "I will not sign," she said. "My father said a woman must know where her ground stands. I know where mine stands. It stands under my feet, and it bears my name." Burke's smile thinned. "Feelings have no place in ledgers," he said. "I will return in 3 days for your answer. Should you decline, I am empowered to act." He put the papers back in their packet and tied the string. He left the quitclaim behind, as if forgetting it would be a favor. He turned toward the door. "Do stay warm," he said. "I would hate to think winter did to you what it does to cattle without sense." He stepped into the snow. The two riders wheeled their horses easy and followed him down the trail. Hiram shut the door and stood with his back against it until his hands stopped shaking. He did not shake often. It took more than cold to do it. Madison picked up the quitclaim like one might pick up a live coal through cloth. She set it on the shelf by the stove as if it could catch the room on fire if left near paper. "I am sorry," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For bringing such trouble to your door." He shook his head. "Trouble would have found me anyway, one way or another. This kind gives a man a straight thing to stand against." She walked to the window and looked out at the trail where 3 sets of tracks marked the snow. The line cut clean down the hill until the spruces hid it. "We will need that deed," she said. "We will," Hiram answered. "Vernon has the trunk," she said. "He may bar his door. He may draw a gun if he finds you on his step." Hiram's mouth went flat. He would do best to remember I once rode with men who did not fear guns. She turned toward him, her face full of calm that was not soft. "We will not take it by force," she said. "We will ask and insist and show that we stand on right. I will put myself between tempers if needed. I am done with fear. It brought me nothing good." He looked at her and saw the weight of those words. He nodded. The sky began to sift flakes again before noon, fine as sifted flour. They set to work. Hiram sharpened his axe and split wood until it was stacked high like a wall against cold. Madison mended torn shirts and patched a saddlebag seam that had been giving trouble for a year. She boiled the kettle and scrubbed the tin cups until they shone in the dim light. Work brought heat where talk could not. By late afternoon, the snow came thicker, soft and steady. Hiram went to the shed and checked the small sled that could be hitched to the mule. He greased the runners and tightened the traces. He checked the mule's feet and brought a handful of oats as reward. It nuzzled his coat pocket for more and bumped him like an old friend. Inside, Madison cleared the table and set out stew. She added one of Clara Green's biscuits and cut it in half. The small act lifted her spirits more than she had expected. She set a small sprig of pine in a cup beside the plate. It looked like nothing and like hope at the same time. They ate in the gentle quiet that comes to people who are tired in the right way. The fire hummed. The snow brushed the window like a hand. After supper, Madison took out the small Bible her mother had kept, the cover worn smooth as river stone. She opened to a page with a ribbon in it and read aloud in a steady voice. She chose a psalm about God being a shelter, a strong tower, an ever-present help in trouble. Hiram sat with his hands on his knees and listened like a man who had forgotten a song and now heard the tune again from the next room. When she finished, she closed the book and set it on the mantel. She did not preach. She did not say what it meant. She let the words hang and do what words can do when given room. Night settled. The wind picked up a little and then eased, like a breath drawn and let go. Hiram banked the fire and laid his bedroll down. Madison folded her quilt back and lay still. 3 days, she said into the dark. 3 days, he answered. If the weather breaks tomorrow, she said, we could reach Vernon's by nightfall if we push, or camp once by the creek and go gentle. We will not push, he said. We will go steady. Steady winds. She smiled in the dim. You sound like my father. He always said a man who looks only at the horizon stumbles over the rock at his feet. He was right, Hiram said. They slept. The night held them and did not break. Dawn came soft and gray. The storm had set a clean sheet over the world, and a hush lay on the ridge that felt holy. Hiram opened the door and stood with his face to it. The air bit and woke him clear. He tasted iron and pine and snow and the faint smoke of his own chimney drifting back. We ride after breakfast, he said. Madison had already set the coffee to boil. She nodded. I will pack bread and jerky. I will take the ledger. I will take Ma's Bible. We will bring back the deed. They ate in companionable silence, and then they set about the small steps a trip needs. Hiram strapped the bedrolls, checked the lantern, and tucked a small tin of matches in his coat. He counted the cartridges in his belt without much thought, and then put 2 back. He did not want lead to be part of this if he could help it. Madison wrapped food in cloth and tied it tight. She pulled on her warmest, stockings, laced her boots slow, and set her jaw like a person stepping onto a stage that mattered. They hitched the sled and led the mule out. The sky looked like it meant to hold its peace a few hours more, a clear window in a winter full of closed doors. They took the lower trail where the wind drifted less. The sled hissed behind them, soft as a whisper. They passed the place where Hiram had found the wagon. The snow had swallowed almost every sign, but he saw the slight sag in the white where the wheel had sunk. He felt Madison's hand brush his sleeve as they went by. She did not speak. She did not need to. They made good time, steady and careful. When the creek cut across the trail, Hiram stepped first and felt for ice that would hold. The mule snorted but followed. Once a fox crossed ahead of them, a quick red slip against the white, and vanished. They stopped at noon under a tangle of fir where the wind could not find them. They ate jerky and a heel of bread and drank coffee that steamed like a promise. Madison's cheeks glowed, and her eyes had a look that wasn't fear and not pride, but a bright patience, the kind that waits for its own hour and knows it will come. They rode on. The sun slid behind a bank of cloud and turned the world flat and shadowless. The light fooled the eye. Hiram warned her, and she took each step like a woman crossing thin places with thick faith. By late afternoon, the fence posts of the Cobb place showed like black pencils stuck up from snow. Smoke rose from the chimney in a poor way, as if the fire inside burned sulky. A dog barked, then stopped. The yard lay hard and empty. The cottonwoods by the creek wore coats of hoarfrost that made them look like old men with long white beards. Hiram halted the mule at the gate and looped the lead rope over the post. He looked at Madison. "We go calm," he said. "We ask and we stand." She nodded. "We stand." They walked to the door. Madison knocked, 3 firm raps. They waited. The seconds stretched thin as wire. Bootsteps came slow. The latch lifted. The door opened to show Vernon Cobb in the dim, his hat on his head though he stood inside, his jaw covered with the gray dust of days without shaving. He smelled of whiskey, and of a house where quarrels have settled in the corners. He blinked. His eyes took in Madison first. They took in Hiram next. His mouth made a line like a scar. "What?" he said. Madison held his gaze. "I came for Ma's trunk," she said. "I came for what is mine." The wind stirred behind them and sent a small drift of snow across the sill. Hiram smelled rain far away, though it was winter. He had a hunter's sense for weather and for men. He felt both shift. Vernon snorted. "You got nerve, girl," he said. "You got shame enough to come to my door after the spectacle you made in town." Madison's voice did not shake. "The spectacle was not mine," she said. "It belonged to cowards who laugh at women who do not fit. Their small eyes." She took a breath. "The trunk, Vernon. It is all I ask." He looked at her, and for a heartbeat something passed across his face that was not anger. He hid it quick. He moved the door half closed and spoke through the crack. "Get off my stoop," he said. "You left. You have no more claim on this place." "I left because you told men to cut the traces and ride," she said. "You left me in a wagon to die." His eyes flicked, and shame showed quick as a fish in a pool, and then was gone. He set his jaw. "You were a weight," he said. "I cut what I had to cut." Hiram felt the old furnace inside him roar to life. He stepped forward. Madison's hand came up again, palm out, calm as a still pond. He stopped. "The trunk," she said a third time. There was a long silence. Somewhere in the cottonwood a jay yelled at the cold. Vernon breathed through his nose like a bull considering the fence. "Wait," he said, and shut the door. Hiram and Madison stood on the step and did not speak. The wind shifted and brought a smell of smoke from inside, sharp and wrong, as if something burned that ought not to. Hiram set his hand on the jamb, ready to force the door if need required. He did not want to. He would if the smell grew worse. The door opened again. Vernon held the old trunk by one handle and dragged it out, bumping it over the sill and leaving scratches on the wood like claw marks. "There," he said. "Take your damned memory box and be gone." He shoved it across the step. The brass corners were dented, and the leather strap had cracked long ago. Hiram lifted it and set it on the sled. It had the weight of a thing that held more than dresses. It had the weight of a choice. Madison looked at Vernon a last time. "You will answer for your words," she said. "Not to me, to the Lord." He flinched, but his mouth kept its hard line. "Get," he said. They did. Hiram took the mule's lead. Madison climbed onto the sled seat and set her feet. The runners bit the snow and held true. They moved back onto the trail as the light began to thin. Neither spoke until the house had shrunk behind the cottonwoods, and the dog's bark was lost to the wind. Then Madison let out a breath that had sat in her chest since the door first opened. "Thank you," she said. "You did it," Hiram answered. She looked at the trunk and laid her hand on its lid. "We will open it by lamplight," she said. "We will not break the seal while his shadow still falls across it." They rode steady into evening. The sky turned the color of iron. A few flakes started again, lazy at first and then more sure. The mule kept its rhythm. Hiram walked beside the sled and listened to the small song the runners made on the hard snow. It sounded like a lullaby from a life he had not known he still wanted. Night took the ridge. The cabin welcomed them with its square shape and its promise of heat. Hiram kindled the fire fast, and Madison brought the trunk inside and set it near the table. They stood together in the warm rush of light as the flames caught. Hiram fetched a knife and handed it to her handle first. "Your father's words," he said. "A woman must know where her ground stands." She nodded. The knife flashed once in the lamplight. The old strap gave with a dry sigh. She raised the lid. Inside lay folded dresses, a blue calico, a winter shawl, a bundle of letters tied with a ribbon gone the color of dust, and at the bottom a small wooden cross her mother had kept by the window. Madison's breath hitched. She set the cross aside with care and lifted the letters. She touched each with her thumb like kissing them without lips. They searched layer by layer. The deed did not show. Madison's face fell and then steadied. She closed her eyes and stood still, thinking of years ago when her father had pressed her small hand to a secret. "Look beneath the cross," he had said. She set the cross on the table and tapped the bottom plank of the trunk. It sounded not quite right. "Here," she said. Hiram brought a small chisel from his toolbox and worked the edge. The plank rose, the false bottom lifted. There, folded tight and wrapped in oiled cloth, lay a paper with a county seal and her father's bold, careful name. The deed. Her hands shook. She set it on the table and smoothed it with her palm. The ink had not faded much. The seal caught the lamplight like a coin. Hiram blew out a breath he had not known he held. "We have it," he said. "We have it," she answered. The wind moaned softly at the corners of the cabin, but inside the air felt steady and warm. Madison pressed the cross back into the trunk and closed the lid with a final, gentle thump. She tied the ribbon around the letters again. She folded the deed into a clean cloth and set it under the Bible on the mantel. "Tomorrow," she said, "we will take this to someone who knows paper. We will show what is true." "We will take it to Reverend Green," Hiram said. "He will bring the right eyes to see it." They ate late and slept the sleep the body gives after a day of standing tall. Snow fell deep through the night and covered their tracks. Morning would bring more men and more paper and more trials. But for now, they had warmth and a deed and the knowledge that they had walked into the lion's mouth and come out with what they came for. The lamplight trembled once and then settled. The mule stamped in the shed. The creek whispered under its ice. The mountain stood close and listened, as if they, too, wanted to hear how the next part would go. The storm returned before sunrise, rolling down from the peaks like gray smoke. By noon, the world outside the cabin disappeared into white. The wind hissed around the eaves, and the drifts climbed halfway up the windows. Inside, the fire burned bright and steady, its light flickering over the walls like waves of gold. Hiram worked quietly at the hearth, mending the leather strap of his rifle sling. Madison sat at the table, sewing a tear in his coat. Between them lay the trunk, now empty save for her mother's cross, pushed aside like a battle one. The deed, wrapped safe under the family Bible, rested on the mantel. Neither spoke for a long time. The quiet between them wasn't cold. It was the kind that grows between people who've come through something hard and haven't yet found words to match it. At last, Madison set down her needle and thread. "I still can't believe it was here all along," she said softly. "Under my mother's cross." Hiram nodded. "Seems right, don't it? She meant for you to find it." Madison smiled faintly, her eyes on the flames. "She always said the Lord hides things in plain sight for those who still believe." He looked over his shoulder at her. "You do?" "I'm trying." She met his eyes. "Some days I think I'm talking into an empty sky. Other days—" She hesitated, her voice trembling a little. "Other days I think he answers through kind souls, like the preacher, or me," Hiram said quietly. She blushed, looking down at the fabric in her lap. "You've been more help than I deserve." He frowned. "Don't talk that way. Ain't nobody undeserving of help." Madison's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You don't know what it's like to be laughed at your whole life, to have men turn away like you're something shameful to look at. I was 16 when one boy told me I'd never fit in a wedding dress." She let out a brittle laugh. "I reckon he thought himself clever." Hiram put down the leather strap and leaned forward. The firelight made his scarred cheek glisten faintly. "That boy was a fool," he said. "Ain't the dress that matters, it's the heart beatin' inside it." Her breath caught. "No one ever said that to me before." "Well," he said, sitting back again. "Reckon no one looked close enough?" The words sat between them, warm as the fire. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but inside, everything seemed still. Madison rose slowly and crossed to the window, peering into the white blur beyond the glass. "I used to dream of getting married," she said softly. "Not for show, just to have someone who saw me, someone who didn't walk faster to be rid of me." She turned back to him. "When my stepfather called me dead weight, I started to believe him. Even when I prayed, I felt like a burden to heaven itself." Hiram's voice was low. "You ain't no burden. You're the strongest woman I ever met. Took more grit to stand in front of that man than most soldiers I knew in the war." She blinked back sudden tears. "You fought in the war?" He nodded. "Cavalry scout. Thought I was doing good work. Turns out I was just learning how to live with ghosts." She watched him closely, hearing the rough edge under his calm tone. "What happened?" He didn't answer at first. He reached for his pipe, then set it back down, as though even the act of lighting it would feel disrespectful to what he was about to say. "We rode south once, me and a few men, chasing what command called hostiles. But the folks we found weren't fighting. They were moving. Women, little ones, just trying to get to warmer ground. Somebody fired a shot. Then all hell broke loose. I still hear the screams sometimes when the wind's high." Madison's hand went to her throat. "You couldn't have known." "Maybe not," he said, his voice heavy. "But I was there, and I didn't stop it. So now I live quiet, up here where no one's asking me to take sides. I trap. I pray when I can, and I try not to think about who I was." She crossed the small space between them and laid her hand gently on his arm. "You're not that man anymore." He looked down at her hand, strong and soft at once. "You sure?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Because the man who saved me in that storm, the man who faced my stepfather without a gun in his hand, he's someone who's already found forgiveness. Maybe he just doesn't believe it yet." He swallowed hard. For a long moment, neither moved. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Then Madison stepped back and went to pour more water into the kettle. "Storm's not letting up," Hiram said quietly. "No," she said, "but it'll pass. Storms always do." They shared supper later. Stew and bread baked from the last of the cornmeal. She told him small stories about her mother's garden, about helping with calves in spring, about the hymns she used to hum when she thought no one listened. Hiram listened to every word as though they were medicine. After they ate, he took his place by the fire. Again, and she sat close, mending one of his wool socks. The air between them was easy, companionable. Outside, the snow thickened, a steady curtain that blurred the edges of the world. Inside, the firelight turned the walls to honey gold. Hiram found himself smiling without meaning to. "You know," he said, "this old place never felt like a home before." She looked up. "What made it one?" He hesitated, then said, "You." Her needle stilled. "Me?" He nodded. "You talk soft. You hum when you mend. You put pine on the table for no reason at all. A man notices those things." She blushed again, but this time she didn't look away. "You shouldn't say such things, Mr. Sloane. Folks will talk." "Let 'em," he said simply. "Talk never froze a man or fed one either. You're worth more than their words." For a heartbeat, her eyes filled. She turned toward the fire, blinking fast. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat like that for a while, two souls thawing beside one another. Later, when she went to lie down, Hiram took his chair by the door, keeping watch out of habit. The storm moaned, but it no longer sounded lonely. It sounded alive, like the voice of the mountains themselves, watching over them. Madison drifted to sleep to that sound, and in her dreams she wasn't running or hiding. She was standing beside a man who saw her not for what the world called her, but for who she was. When morning came, the storm had spent itself. The world outside glittered like glass, every tree branch heavy with snow. Madison rose early, made coffee, and found Hiram already outside, breaking ice at the trough for the mule. She smiled as she watched him through the window, breath misting in the cold. For the first time since she'd been left behind in that wagon, she didn't feel forgotten. Inside, the fire had burned low, but its coals still glowed. A quiet, steady red. The next morning broke clear and sharp, the kind of day when every sound carried for miles. The snow glittered blue in the light, and the mountains shone like silver blades under the rising sun. Madison stood by the hearth, wrapping the deed in oilcloth while Hiram saddled the mule. The world outside was white and silent, waiting. "We'll take it straight to the preacher," he said, fastening the last strap. "Reverend Green'll know what to do." Madison nodded. She had barely slept the night before, her thoughts circling around the folded paper on the table. The deed was her father's last promise. Proof she wasn't forgotten. She slipped it into her satchel and tied the strap firm. "I'm ready," she said. They left the cabin at mid-morning. The sled hissed softly over the snow as the mule pulled them down the mountain trail. Sunlight scattered through the pines, and every frozen branch shimmered like glass. The air bit cold, but the sky was a clear, endless blue. Neither spoke much. The weight of what they carried seemed to press the words down inside them. When they reached the lower pass, Madison looked back. The cabin was a small, dark dot against the white hills. "Hard to believe I almost died out there," she murmured. Hiram followed her gaze. "You didn't," he said simply. "You lived. That counts for something." By late afternoon, they reached the valley floor. The smoke of Silver Creek rose in the distance. Madison pulled her shawl tighter, her heart beating faster with every mile. The town looked much as it had days before. Snow piled along the boardwalks, a few horses tied outside the saloon, the bell of the little church glinting in the sun. Yet something felt different now. This time she wasn't entering as a cast-off woman needing supplies. She was coming with proof, something that belonged to her by right. They stopped outside Reverend Green's parsonage. The preacher was splitting wood in his yard, his breath puffing white. He smiled when he saw them. "Morning, friends. You look like folks who found what they were seeking." "We did," Hiram said. "Got a paper that needs an honest eye." Inside, the parsonage smelled of stew and lamp oil. Clara Green met them at the door, wiping her hands on her apron. "You made it back safe," she said warmly. "Sit, both of you. You look half frozen." Madison handed the oilcloth bundle to the Reverend. Her fingers trembled slightly as he unfolded the paper and spread it flat on the table. He adjusted his spectacles, tracing the signature at the bottom with one finger. "Well now," he murmured. "This is your father's mark, sure enough. Witnessed and sealed proper." Clara leaned over his shoulder. "So that man Burke can't touch her land?" The preacher frowned slightly. "He can try. He's got influence in town and friends with the railroad office. But the Lord doesn't bless deceit forever. I'll send a telegram to the county judge tonight. We'll have this deed certified before week's end." Relief washed over Madison so quickly it left her dizzy. She pressed her hands together, whispering a soft "thank you" under her breath. Clara smiled. "There now, child. See how truth comes to light? It may take a while, but it comes. Hiram nodded. We'll stay in town till we get word. I don't trust Burke to keep his distance. The preacher looked at him with quiet understanding. Then stay here tonight. My wife won't hear of you riding back in this cold. Hiram hesitated. We don't aim to be trouble. You ain't, Clara said firmly. You're guests. By nightfall, the parsonage was full of warmth and soft lamplight. Madison helped Clara knead bread, while Hiram mended a broken chair leg for the preacher. The air smelled of pine soap and stew. For the first time in months, Madison felt something close to peace. After supper, Reverend Green sat by the fire, reading from the Bible in his slow, measured voice. The truth shall make you free, he read, looking up with a kind smile. Even on the frontier, that holds. Madison looked into the flames and thought about those words. Truth, something she had hidden from for so long, was finally setting her free. The next morning, Hiram helped the Reverend carry the telegram down to the post office. The streets were still half iced, the boards slick under their boots. Madison stayed behind, sewing by the fire while Clara spoke quietly of her own years of hardship, how she had lost her first husband to fever, but found new strength in tending the sick. When the men returned, the preacher said, The judge will ride in 2 days' time. He'll want to see the deed himself. Madison nodded, though her stomach fluttered. 2 days felt like forever. That afternoon, she and Clara went into town for fabric and thread. The same women who had whispered behind their hands now smiled, cautious but polite. A few offered greetings. A child ran up to Madison and handed her a pine cone wrapped in ribbon, saying, Mama says you helped the preacher. Madison knelt, smiling as she accepted it. That's mighty kind of your mama, she said. The gesture warmed her heart. But as they stepped out of the general store, Ephraim Burke appeared across the street. His brown coat gleamed, and his polished boots left neat tracks in the snow. He tipped his hat with mock courtesy. Ladies, he called, enjoying the day? Clara's hand tightened on Madison's arm. Keep walking, she murmured. Madison hesitated. Something inside her, something new and steady, rose up. We are, she said, and it'll be better when justice is done. Burke's smile froze, thin and cold. Justice is a matter of paperwork, ma'am, and paperwork has a way of going missing. He tipped his hat again and strode off toward the telegraph office. Clara frowned. He's rattled, that one. Men like him don't take kindly to losing. I'm not afraid anymore, Madison said quietly. The truth's on our side. That night, back at the parsonage, Hiram could tell something in her had changed. She sat straighter, her chin higher. When he asked what happened, she only said, He tried to scare me. I let him see I wouldn't bend. He smiled. That's my girl. She blushed at the words, then caught herself smiling too. The next morning dawned gray and restless. The wind had shifted, and by noon the air carried the smell of a coming storm. But before the first flakes fell, a telegraph boy came running up the church steps, waving a yellow slip. Reverend Green read it aloud. Judge en route from Gunnison. Arrives at dusk tomorrow, hold hearing in town hall. Hiram's hand tightened on the back of a chair. Tomorrow, then. Tomorrow? Madison echoed softly. The preacher nodded. You'll need witnesses, honest townsfolk who'll stand up for you. I can speak for her, Hiram said at once. And you will, Reverend Green said. But it helps when others do, too. Clara will testify, and I'll vouch for the paper's truth. We'll see justice done. That night, snow fell again, light but steady. The little house glowed like a lantern in the storm. Madison couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching flakes drift against the glass. Hiram rose quietly and joined her. You worried? A little, she admitted. What if Burke brings lies we can't fight? Then we'll tell the truth louder, he said. She smiled faintly, leaning her head against the frosted pane. You make it sound simple. It ain't, he said. But it's right. The wind shifted again, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Tomorrow would decide everything. Their home, their safety, maybe even their place in this town. Hiram reached out, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. You get some rest, he said softly. Tomorrow we stand together. And as the fire burned low and the snow fell against the window, Madison closed her eyes and prayed, not for vengeance, but for courage. The storm broke at dawn, leaving Silver Creek glittering under a pale sun. Icicles hung like glass swords from the rooftops, and the air smelled clean and sharp. The town stirred early, men sweeping porches, women hauling wood, and the church bell ringing slow and steady for morning prayers. By mid-morning, the whole valley seemed to hum with rumor. Word had spread. The judge was coming. Some said he was bringing soldiers. Others whispered that Ephraim Burke had new papers in his coat pocket. Hiram and Madison walked to the town hall beside Reverend Green. The streets were crowded, the boardwalks lined with curious faces. Hiram's coat was brushed clean for the first time in weeks. Madison wore her mother's blue shawl, the same one she'd found in the trunk. The deed rested safely in her satchel, tied with ribbon. As they neared the hall, the gossip rippled like wind through wheat. That's her, the Cobb girl, the fat one the mountain man found. Word is he declared for her in front of half the town. Lord above, they say she owns half the South Creek now. Madison kept her head high. She'd prayed for strength that morning, and it held her steady. The preacher's wife walked beside her, chin lifted, daring anyone to speak ill within earshot. Inside, the hall smelled of pine and kerosene. A fire crackled in the stove near the judge's table. Men filled the benches, hats in hand. Ephraim Burke stood near the front, his fine coat buttoned to the chin, a faint smile curving his lips. The judge, a stout man with a gray beard, looked up from his papers. We'll begin, he said, tapping the gavel once. Who brings this petition? Reverend Green stepped forward. I do, on behalf of Madison Cobb, rightful heir to the Jacob Cobb homestead. The judge nodded. And the opposition? Burke's voice was smooth as butter. Ephraim Burke, representing the Territorial Land Office and the Denver and Southern Railroad Company. The murmurs grew louder at that. Railroad meant money, power. The judge looked between them. Then let's hear the case. Madison rose, her knees trembling but her voice clear. My father worked that land with his own hands. He paid his taxes until the year he died. This deed, she pulled it from the satchel, is his signed claim, witnessed and sealed. The judge took the paper, examined it, then passed it to his clerk. Properly written, he said. Mr. Burke, your response? Burke smiled as though addressing a crowd of children. Your Honor, I hold here a copy of a forfeiture notice. Unpaid taxes, failure to re-register the claim, and no family left in residence. The land has therefore reverted to the railroad by federal charter. He tapped his papers confidently. The lady's document, while sentimental, has no present legal force. A murmur ran through the hall. Madison's hands clenched together, but she met Burke's gaze and didn't look away. The judge frowned. And how? Did you obtain these documents? Burke hesitated only a second too long. Through official channels. Reverend Green stood. Begging your pardon, Your Honor, but those official channels run through Burke's own office. He wrote both papers, one with the truth, one with a lie. Laughter broke out in the back rows. Someone whispered, "Preacher's got him now." The judge raised his hand for silence. "We'll need proof." Hiram stepped forward. "He came to our cabin 3 days past," he said. "Told us to sign a quitclaim and be rid of it. Said the law would handle it otherwise. That sound like fair business to you?" The judge turned to Burke. "Did you threaten these people?" Burke's polite mask slipped. "I advised them of the law, nothing more." The judge motioned for the clerk. "Bring me the ledger from the land office." The boy ran off, boots clattering, the room filled with restless whispers. Madison sat down, her pulse hammering. She leaned toward Hiram. "He's lying. I know he is." "I know," Hiram said quietly. "But the truth's patient. Let it do its work." The clerk returned, panting, holding a thick ledger. The judge flipped through it, then stopped. His eyebrows rose. "Mr. Burke, this page is your handwriting, correct?" Burke's jaw tightened. "It is." "And this mark here, Cobb, paid in full, signed 2 years ago?" A long silence. Then Burke said, "A clerical error." The judge's gavel struck once. "Enough. The court recognizes the deed of Jacob Cobb as valid and binding. The homestead remains property of his heir, Madison Cobb." For a heartbeat, the hall went utterly still. Then applause burst out like thunder. People stamped their boots, cheering. Clara Green hugged Madison tight. The preacher bowed his head, whispering, "Praise God." Burke's face went white. He gathered his papers, muttering something about appeals, and stalked out the side door. Madison stood, trembling, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly to the judge. He smiled kindly. "Don't thank me, miss. Thank your father, for raising a daughter who'd fight fair." Outside, the air felt lighter, as if the whole world had taken a breath. The townsfolk gathered around, offering smiles and handshakes. The same women who'd once whispered now told her she looked radiant. Children pointed, calling her the lady who beat the railroad. Hiram watched her, pride swelling in his chest. She stood tall, her blue shawl fluttering in the wind, her face glowing with the strength she didn't even know she had. When the crowd began to thin, he stepped forward and spoke loud enough for all still nearby to hear. "I said once I loved her. I'll say it again, right here, before God and folks alike." The crowd quieted. Madison turned to him, eyes wide. "Hiram." He took her hands, rough and scarred from years of work. "You came from ashes, Madison Cobb, and you built something good out of it. You showed me what grace looks like. I aim to spend what years I got left beside that kind of light." The preacher smiled behind them. The crowd began to murmur, soft, warm approval instead of gossip this time. Madison's voice shook. "You mean that?" "Every word." She hesitated just long enough for tears to brim her lashes. Then she nodded. "Then I reckon I love you too." The town bell rang noon, its deep toll echoing across the valley. For once it sounded not like duty or warning, but like blessing. Later that afternoon, they shared stew and coffee at the parsonage, while Reverend Green wired the county with the judge's ruling. Clara insisted on setting out pie, saying, "Victory ought to taste sweet." Madison laughed through tears. "You'll make me cry again." "Then let it out," Clara said. "It's what the good Lord made joy for." As evening fell, the lights of Silver Creek flickered to life, one by one. From the church steps, Hiram watched the glow spread across the valley. He felt something stir deep inside, a peace he hadn't known since before the war. Beside him, Madison rested her hand in his. "What happens now?" she asked. He smiled. "We go home. And after? We start living." She looked up at him, snow catching in her lashes. "Together?" He nodded. If you'll have me." She squeezed his hand. "I already do." The preacher's bell tolled once more, low and steady in the distance, as they turned toward the mountains and the life waiting for them there. The morning after the hearing dawned golden and calm. The town's talk had shifted overnight, from gossip about a fat girl and her trapper to admiration for the woman who'd beaten the railroad's man with nothing more than truth and paper. Children waved as Madison and Hiram passed, and a few townsfolk even tipped their hats. It was strange, hearing kind words from the same people who once whispered behind their backs. Madison met it all with quiet grace. She smiled but didn't linger. "It's a small miracle, isn't it?" she said as they crossed the bridge out of Silver Creek. Hiram chuckled. "Small or big, I'll take it." They rode home through meltwater and thawing pine. The sun glittered on the ridges, and a pair of eagles circled high overhead. Everything felt washed clean. The road curved along the creek where the snow thinned into mud and early green shoots. By noon, the cabin came into view, its roof shining wet under the sun. Hiram helped Madison down from the sled, and for the first time since he'd rescued her, she laughed, freely and without shame. "It looks smaller than I remembered," she said, brushing snow from her skirt. "That's 'cause you've grown bigger inside," Hiram said with a wink. "The heart makes the world look smaller when it's full." She laughed again, shaking her head. "You talk like a preacher when you're happy." "Then I must be near saved," he said softly. Inside, the cabin was just as they'd left it, warm, tidy, and smelling faintly of cedar. Madison unpacked her sewing, humming a tune her mother used to hum. Hiram stoked the fire and hung his rifle above the mantel. It was a perfect day, until the sound of hooves broke it. The mule whinnied outside, uneasy. Hiram's hand went to the rifle out of habit, but he didn't reach for it yet. The riders drew up near the gate, 3 men in dark coats. Ephraim Burke was in front. Madison froze when she saw him through the window. "He's back," she whispered. Hiram stepped to the door and pushed it open. "You got nerve, Burke. Thought the judge's word was clear enough." Burke dismounted slowly, adjusting his gloves. "The judge ruled on what he saw, but papers have a way of being misunderstood. I came to clarify terms." "There ain't nothing left to clarify." Burke smiled thinly. "That's where you're mistaken. The railroad doesn't forgive easily. There's talk of a federal review. Until then, I'm authorized to secure properties in question. I'd rather you left peacefully." Madison stepped forward, chin high. "You can't threaten us, Mr. Burke. You lost. It's over." He looked at her the way a man looks at something beneath his boots. "You've made a great fuss, Miss Cobb. But out here, the law bends toward the hand that feeds it." "Then maybe it's time it bent the other way," she said. Burke's smile faltered. "Defiance doesn't suit you. You'd do well to remember where your place is." "My place," she said, "is on my father's land." The air between them tightened. Burke's men shifted in their saddles, hands near their belts. Hiram's voice came low and even. "You best get off my ridge before I make you regret coming." Burke's eyes flicked toward him. "Threats from a war relic? You'll find the railroad less forgiving than the army." "I'm done fighting wars," Hiram said, "but I still know how." Something in his voice made Burke pale. He mounted quickly. "You'll hear from us again," he said, "and next time it won't be talk." He kicked his horse, and the 3 men rode off through the pines, their hooves echoing down the trail. When they were gone, Madison leaned against the doorframe, breathing hard. "He's not finished," she said. "No," Hiram said. "Men like him never are, but neither are we." That night, they sat close by the fire, the deed spread open on the table. Madison traced her father's name with one finger. "He's trying to scare us into leaving," she said. "He don't know who he's dealing with," Hiram replied. She smiled faintly. "A mountain man and a stubborn woman?" He smiled back. "Ain't a safer pair in all of Colorado." Still, as the wind rose outside, unease settled in both of them. Madison checked the shutters twice, before bed. Hiram kept his rifle beside the chair, though he prayed he'd never need to use it. In the middle of the night, a noise woke him, the faint creak of snow under boots. He eased up, heart pounding. Through the window, he saw shadowy figures moving near the shed. He slipped out quietly, rifle in hand. The cold burned his lungs. He saw the men trying to pry open the door where the mule and tools were kept. "Hold it right there," he barked. The figures froze. One bolted, the other two turned and ran into the trees. A shot cracked through the dark, missing him by a yard. Hiram fired once into the air, more warning than harm. The sound rolled down the valley like thunder. Within moments, the intruders vanished into the timber. Madison rushed to the door, her lantern high. "What happened?" "They tried to burn the shed," he said grimly, pointing to the spilled lamp oil on the snow. "Burke's making good on his threat." She pressed a hand to her chest. "What do we do?" He looked towards the road. "We don't scare easy, but we ain't fools. We go to town tomorrow, get the preacher and the marshal involved. Burke's playing dirtier than I thought." By morning, the wind had died down. The tracks from the intruders led straight toward Silver Creek. Madison brewed coffee while Hiram repaired the shed door. Neither spoke much. The danger had changed something. It wasn't just land now, it was justice. When they reached town, Reverend Green's face hardened at the news. "That man's pride's driving him to madness," he said. "We'll take this straight to Marshal Dunn." The marshal was a wiry man with a calm drawl and eyes that saw everything. He listened, nodded once, and said, "Burke's been on my list a while. Bribes, false records, threats, it all adds up. He's clever, though, never leaves proof." Madison held out the lamp oil tin they'd found near the shed. "He left this," she said. "The initials on the bottom, EB." The marshal smiled thinly. "That'll do." He stood, adjusting his hat. "You two head home. I'll send a deputy to watch the ridge. If Burke shows again, we'll be waiting." As they left, the preacher clasped Hiram's shoulder. "You've done right by her, Sloan, but don't let anger rule you now." Hiram nodded. "I won't. Not unless I have to." The trip home was quiet. The mountains loomed tall and blue, their peaks lost in thin clouds. When they reached the cabin, Madison stood for a long moment on the porch, looking out over the valley her father had loved. "This land's worth every fight," she said softly. Hiram looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. "So's the woman who stands on it." She smiled, and for a while the fear seemed far away. The world was still dangerous, but it was theirs. That night, as the first stars came out, Hiram bowed his head in prayer for the first time in years. "Lord," he said quietly, "I don't ask for much. Just give me the strength to keep her safe, and the wisdom not to lose myself in the fight." The wind sighed against the cabin walls, as if answering back. Outside, far down the trail, a single rider stopped under the trees. Ephraim Burke stared toward the distant glow of the cabin, his face pale in the starlight. He lifted a flask to his lips, drank, and muttered, "You think you've won? You ain't seen the end." Then he turned his horse and disappeared into the dark. The next morning dawned gray and thin, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. A quiet unease hung between Hiram and Madison as they packed the mule. The memory of the night raid hadn't faded. It sat heavy in their chests like a stone. We'll ride to your stepfather's, Hiram said, checking the harness. If he still has any old records or tools from your Piaz ranch, they'll prove Burke's fraud beyond question. Madison tightened her shawl. Vernon won't take kindly to seeing me. I reckon he don't have to take kindly, Hiram replied. He just has to listen. They left at sunrise, following the creek south. The land grew rougher, the snow thinner where wind swept the hills bare. Ravens wheeled overhead, their calls echoing off the ridge. Madison rode in silence, her gloved hands gripping the reins. Each turn of the trail brought her closer to the man who'd left her to die. By midday, they reached the edge of the old Cobb ranch. The fences leaned, the barn roof sagged, and the house looked smaller than she remembered. Smoke drifted weakly from the chimney. Hiram dismounted first and tied the mule at the gate. "Stay close," he said. Madison nodded, her face pale but steady. They crossed the frozen yard and knocked. The door opened to reveal Vernon Cobb, gray-bearded, hollow-eyed, with whiskey on his breath. He stared at Madison as though he'd seen a ghost. "Well," he muttered, "didn't expect to see the girl I buried." "You didn't bury me," Madison said quietly. "You left me." Vernon's mouth twitched. "Same difference. What do you want?" "Ma's trunk," she said, "and anything of Pa's you kept." He let out a harsh laugh. "You think I'd give you what your pa left, after the shame you brought this family?" "The only shame here is yours," Hiram said evenly. Vernon's eyes narrowed. "You stay out of this, mountain man." Madison stepped forward. "I came for what's mine, nothing more." The wind whistled through the yard. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Vernon's shoulders sagged. He turned, muttering, "Wait here." Inside, they heard him banging through drawers. Madison's hands trembled, but she stood her ground. When he came back, he dragged the old trunk across the floor. "Take it," he said, shoving it through the door. "Take the ghost of this place with you." Hiram bent to lift it, but Vernon's voice stopped him. "You think she's better than me?" the man snarled. "That's what this is? Your charity case?" Madison met his eyes. "He doesn't see me as less. That's what makes him better than you." For a second, shame flickered in Vernon's face. Then he slammed the door shut. They loaded the trunk onto the sled and started back toward the trail. Neither spoke until the ranch was a blur behind them. The only sound was the steady creak of the runners and the whisper of wind through the pines. Finally, Madison let out a long breath. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done." "You did fine," Hiram said. "He can't hurt you anymore." She looked ahead, her eyes bright with something between sorrow and relief. "I didn't think I'd feel pity for him, but I do. He's just a man who never learned how to love anything he couldn't control." Hiram nodded. "That kind dies bitter. You're not like him." They reached the halfway mark by dusk and made camp under a stand of fir. Hiram built a fire while Madison warmed coffee on the coals. She sat close to the flames, her face soft in the glow. "I keep thinking of Pa," she said. "He'd want me to forgive Vernon." "Maybe one day," Hiram said. "But not tonight. Tonight you rest easy knowing you did what was right." She smiled faintly. "You always say things so plain. Makes it easier to breathe." He looked at her across the fire. "Plain's the only way I know." The night deepened around them, but the warmth held. Somewhere beyond the ridge, wolves howled, a lonely sound that no longer frightened Madison. She looked toward the stars and whispered a prayer for peace, both for herself and for the man she'd faced. In that stillness, Hiram realized something quiet and certain. The woman sitting across from him wasn't the same one he'd rescued from the snow. She was stronger now, rooted like the mountains themselves. And as the firelight danced over their faces, he felt, for the first time, that the long road ahead, whatever storms might come, would be theirs to walk together. The wind followed them home, whistling through the trees like a warning. Snow flurries swirled across the ridge as Hiram tied the mule and helped Madison carry the trunk inside. The fire still glowed faintly from morning. He threw on kindling until the cabin filled with light again. Madison knelt by the trunk and began unpacking. Her mother's shawl, a few letters, an old Bible, and a bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Pa's handwriting," she whispered. "It must be here." But as she sorted through the bundle, her fingers slowed. The deed, their lifeline, was gone. Hiram crouched beside her. "Check again," he said quietly. She did, 3 times, hands shaking. Only receipts, notes, and a church tithe record remained. "I don't understand," she said, her voice cracking. "I saw him hide it in this trunk when I was a girl. It has to be here." He rubbed his chin. "Could have slipped out. Could have been taken." Madison looked up, eyes glistening. "Taken? By who?" "Burke's men knew we'd be gone today," Hiram said grimly. "They could have followed." Her shoulders sagged. "Then it's all for nothing." "No," he said firmly. "You still got truth on your side. Paper don't make a soul righteous." But later, after she'd gone to bed, he sat by the fire long into the night, staring at the empty trunk. He knew men like Burke. They didn't stop till they'd ground hope to dust. When dawn came, Madison found him still awake. He handed her a cup of coffee. "We'll find that deed," he said. "Maybe not today, maybe not easy. But we will." She nodded, weary but resolute. "Then I'll trust you, Hiram. I've trusted worse odds and lived." They prayed together before leaving the cabin, asking for strength and for justice not written in ink, but carved into hearts. Outside, the storm eased, and a single beam of light broke through the clouds. It struck the snow at their feet, bright as gold. Hiram smiled faintly. "Reckon the Lord just told us to keep walking." Madison took his hand, and together they stepped into the cold, ready to face whatever waited next. The snow had stopped by Sunday, leaving the valley white and shining. Bells from Silver Creek's small church drifted through the crisp air. Madison wrapped herself in her mother's shawl, the blue one she'd mended the night before, and looked toward the town. "I need to go," she said. "If I stay here fretting, fear will eat me whole." Hiram nodded. "Then we'll go together." The ride down the ridge was quiet. Frost clung to every branch, turning the pines into cathedrals of glass. When they reached Silver Creek, townsfolk were already filing into the church. Miners, farmers, wives in patched dresses, and children chasing each other through the snow. A few stared as the pair dismounted, but the old sneers were gone. The air felt different now, almost welcoming. Inside, the small sanctuary smelled of pine boughs and coal smoke. Reverend Green stood at the front, his Bible open. He smiled when he saw them. "Good to have you here," he said. The service was simple: hymns, prayer, and a sermon about the least of these. Madison listened hard, her hands clasped tight. When the choir sang Amazing Grace, her voice joined softly at first, then stronger, until even Hiram heard the tremor of hope behind it. Afterward, the preacher's wife, Clara, came to her with a warm smile. "You sew, don't you? We need quilts for the sick over at the mission house." "I can do that," Madison said, surprised by how quickly the words left her mouth. Clara nodded. "Good. Helping others is the surest way to remember you still matter." They spent the afternoon at the mission, mending clothes and heating broth for a fevered boy. When the child opened his eyes and whispered a weak, "Thank you," Madison felt something bloom inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. By the time evening came, townsfolk were greeting her kindly on the street. A ranch wife pressed her hand and said, "You've got courage, miss. We could use more like you." As they walked back toward the parsonage, Hiram said, "Looks like they're starting to see what I saw all along." Madison smiled faintly. Maybe, or maybe I just stopped hiding. Snow began falling again, soft, slow flakes swirling under the lamplight. The church bell tolled once, its echo deep and steady. She looked up at Hiram, her eyes bright. "Tomorrow we start again. If Burke wants a fight, he'll find me standing." Hiram grinned. "You're something fierce when you talk like that." "I learned from the best," she said. By late morning, gray clouds rolled in again, thick as smoke. Madison stood at the window and saw them, 2 riders dismounting in the yard. The sight of polished boots and a government seal on a folded paper made her heart sink. "He's come back," she whispered. Hiram was already at the door. "Stay behind me." Ephraim Burke stepped forward, hat gleaming, smile thin as ice. "By authority of the territorial office," he said, holding up the paper. "This land is now under seizure until ownership is confirmed." Hiram's voice was calm but tight. "The judge confirmed it last week." Burke's eyes glinted. "A judge's word can be appealed. Until then, I act on behalf of the law." Behind him, soldiers began to pull down the fence rails. Madison rushed out, her skirts catching snow. "Stop!" she cried. "That's my father's fence. You've no right!" Burke turned, his tone mocking. "The law doesn't care for your father's ghosts, Miss Cobb." Something fierce rose in her. She stood tall, facing him squarely. "Then maybe the law's forgotten what right means." Hiram's hand hovered near his rifle. "Burke," he said evenly, "you take one more board, and I'll take it as trespass." The soldiers hesitated. Even Burke's smirk faltered. For a moment, the wind was the only sound. Then Madison stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "I'll fight you, but with truth, not bullets. You hear me? You may own ink and paper, but I have God, and He keeps His own." The soldiers glanced at one another. Finally, Burke barked, "Enough! We'll return when this farce is over." He swung into his saddle and rode off, fury stiff in his posture. When the sound of hooves faded, Madison turned to Hiram. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes burned bright. "He'll be back," she said. Hiram nodded. "Then we'll meet him ready." That evening they rode to Silver Creek to see Reverend Green. He listened, frowning deeply. "He's desperate," the preacher said. "A man who's losing power is always dangerous. But you did right, Madison. The Lord honors those who stand without hate." She smiled faintly. "It was hard not to hate him." "That's why it mattered," Reverend Green said. "Faith tested by injustice shines brightest." When they left the parsonage, dusk had fallen, and snow began again, soft and pure, covering the tracks of men who thought they owned the world. Hiram took Madison's hand as they walked toward the waiting mule. "You spoke like a prophet today," he said. She looked up at him, weary but strong. "I only spoke what was true." Snow still lay deep around the town when Hiram and Madison arrived at the parsonage the next morning. The preacher had already lit his lamps and spread parchment across the table. "We'll gather signatures," Reverend Green said. "The judge won't ignore the voice of a town." Madison sat beside him, her pen trembling as she wrote the first line. "We, the citizens of Silver Creek, stand for the rightful land of Madison Cobb." Her name looked small on the page, but something inside her felt larger than fear. All that day they went from door to door. The blacksmith signed first, then the storekeeper, then the widow, who'd once crossed the street to avoid Madison. By sunset, the page was filled with names. At the telegraph office, the preacher wired the petition to the county seat. "Now," he said, "we wait." The waiting stretched for days. Hiram chopped wood and fixed hinges. Madison mended quilts for the mission house. At night, they sat by the fire, reading scripture aloud. She grew steadier with each verse, her voice soft but sure. On the fourth morning, a telegraph boy pounded on the door, breathless. Reverend Green read aloud, "Hearing granted, judge en route." Madison covered her mouth, tears shining. Hiram grinned, rough hand closing over hers. "Told you truth don't stay buried." The judge arrived at dawn in a sleigh drawn by 2 bay horses, his breath steaming in the cold. Townsfolk crowded the steps of the Silver Creek Hall, whispering and stamping their boots for warmth. Madison stood at the front beside Hiram, her hands folded around the worn Bible her mother had left her. The deed lay tucked safely inside. When the judge entered, all talk ceased. He set down his gloves, cleared his throat, and said, "We'll hear both sides, plain and proper." Ephraim Burke stepped forward first, polished as ever. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this woman's claim is sentiment, not law. My office holds record of forfeiture, taxes unpaid, title expired." The judge motioned. "Present your proof." Burke laid out papers, crisp and new, each stamped with an official seal. But Reverend Green rose, holding a ledger from the town clerk. "Your Honor, these pages bear the same seal, but different handwriting. Burke forged them." The hall stirred. Burke's face paled. The judge compared the marks, eyes narrowing. "The ink's too fresh," he said, "and the witnesses named here died last spring." Madison stepped forward, voice steady. "My father paid every due he owed. This deed is his hand and heart together. I only ask the truth be seen." She passed the paper forward. The judge examined it carefully, then looked up. "It's genuine," he said, "and justice don't belong to the highest bidder." He struck the gavel once. "The court rules for Madison Cobb. The land stands hers, free and clear." Applause broke like thunder. Clara Green wept openly. Hiram exhaled a breath that felt years old. Burke gathered his false papers and fled through the back door, his boots slipping on the ice as the crowd jeered. The preacher lifted his Bible high. "The Lord has shown mercy," he cried, "and the proud are brought low." Madison turned to Hiram, tears glistening. "It's over," she whispered. He smiled, voice rough with relief. "No, sweetheart, it's just beginning." The snow melted fast that week, and by Friday evening Silver Creek shimmered under lantern light. The church bell rang, calling folks to the winter social. Long tables were laid with pies and stew, and laughter drifted through the cold. Madison stood near the doorway, smoothing her calico dress, the same blue one she'd sewn for the hearing. Clara Green fastened a small ribbon in her hair and said softly, "You've earned this joy. Don't hide from it." When Madison stepped inside, the room quieted. For a heartbeat, everyone looked. Then Reverend Green clapped his hands. "Let's eat before the biscuits freeze." Laughter broke the tension, and the warmth returned. Hiram entered behind her, broad and steady in clean buckskins. He found her near the stove and smiled. "You look like home," he said simply. She blushed and looked away, though her smile lingered. After supper, the fiddles struck up a tune, and couples began to dance. Hiram took Madison's hand and led her to the floor. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "I've never been surer." When the music paused, Hiram raised his voice so all could hear. "Your curvy body drives me wild, Madison, but it's your heart that keeps me steady." The room went still, then erupted in laughter, cheers, even applause. Madison covered her face, laughing through tears. For once, the words that once shamed her were a blessing. Then, from the doorway, a rough voice spoke. "Madison." It was Vernon Cobb. He looked smaller now, hat in hand. "I came to say I was wrong," he said hoarsely. "You were never dead weight. I was the one too small to see your worth." Madison's eyes filled, but her voice was gentle. "I forgive you." The preacher nodded, and the crowd grew quiet. That night, under the lamplight and music, something in Silver Creek changed. Where gossip once lived, kindness took root. Spring came soft to the mountains. The last snow melted into clear streams that wound through the valley, and grass pushed up green against the cabin walls. Madison stood on the porch, her hands resting on her belly, smiling at the sight of Hiram repairing the corral. The sun caught in his hair, and for a moment the world felt whole. The cabin looked different now, painted trim, clean windows, flowers growing by the step. Inside, a cradle waited by the hearth, carved from pine Hiram had cut himself. The scent of sawdust and bread filled the room. When he came in, he brushed the dirt from his hands and kissed her cheek. "Roof's tight, fences mended, and the mule's fat. We're near ready for summer." Madison laughed softly. "We're ready for more than that." He looked at her gently, eyes warm. "You mean the little one?" She nodded. "I think our home's big enough for 3. Hiram's rough hand covered hers. "Then the Lord's been kinder to me than I ever deserved." Outside, the creek murmured, and the mountains stood calm beneath the golden sky. Madison whispered a prayer of thanks, for mercy, for love, for the life they'd built from ruin. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.